Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into an urgent, unfolding situation right in Los Angeles. It's a deep dive into this really compelling intersection of federal power, local protests, and some, well, truly surprising community innovation.
Exactly. Our mission for you today is really to unpack these complexities. We've pulled insights from, a range of sources, Associated Press reports, the Daily Beast, BBC News, analyzing the recent National Guard deployment, the ongoing ICE raids, and maybe most interestingly, the remarkable ways LA residents are responding.
Yeah, we want to give you a concise look at the legal battles, the human impact, and this really unexpected role technology is playing.
hmm And what we're about to uncover involves a pretty rare legal standoff, a controversial presidential move that definitely stirred things up.
And the surprising way an everyday app got kind of weaponized for activism. So, okay, let's jump right in. So, to set the scene, our sources tell us that the spark for all this was really an escalation in these ICE raids across Los Angeles. Now, for listeners maybe not fully familiar, ICE is U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Right, the federal agency handling immigration laws. And initially, the former president had stated quite clearly that the focus was on individuals described using some very strong terms, murderers, drug dealers, gang members, and so on.
But what became clear, and sources like the BBC documented this, was a real shift in who was actually being targeted.
Yeah, a profound shift, actually. BBC footage showed U.S. Border Patrol agents arresting workers at, of all places, a car wash. Not exactly the hardened criminals described earlier.
Right.
6 people detained there. One guy had worked for that business for 10 years. So it really revealed that these raids weren't just surgical strikes. They felt more like a broader sweep into settled, working immigrant communities. It fundamentally changed who was being impacted.
And the human cost here is just, well, it's heartbreaking. You hear the story of Naomi's husband, Jesus. No criminal background, lived in America for 30 years.
30 years?
Yeah, and he gets sent to a detention center 800 miles away in Texas. His 10-year-old, reportedly in shock. His 5-year-old just kept asking for his dad.
And when you think about the scale, maybe 1.8 million undocumented workers estimated in California alone, you start to grasp the ripple effect. It hits countless families, local economies.
Absolutely. It really highlights this tension between, the stated federal policy and the actual real impact on people's lives.
Yeah, and it gets more complicated. The former president did announce on June 12th a temporary pause on what he called very aggressive raids. He even mentioned they were hurting business.
Okay, so a pause?
Well, a brief one. That order was apparently quickly usurped. That's the word used by the Department of Homeland Security. They directed raids to continue. Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin was explicit. Worksite enforcement remains a cornerstone of our efforts, citing public safety, national security, economic stability.
So one part of the government says pause, another says go.
Exactly. It shows how quickly a stated policy can get overridden by an agency's mandate. You see that inherent friction within the executive branch itself.
So given that immediate human impact, the ongoing enforcement, how did the community actually manage to organize such a rapid response? I mean, what allowed for this kind of unique resistance?
Well, the answer points to a really unexpected tool. Amazon's Neighbors app. The app for Ring doorbells.
Yeah, for like finding lost packages or reporting, I don't know, a suspicious car or something.
Exactly. Designed for relatively mundane things, but residents converted it into an ICE warning system.
Wow, how did that work?
People started sharing photos, videos, real-time info about suspected ICE operations. Its use reportedly surged right around June 7th, just as the protests were escalating.
So real-time community intelligence.
Pretty much. One Southern California resident called it very grassroots, a tool to help keep neighbors safe. We even saw social media comments like, Ring camera is saving so many families' lives, and claiming it proved harassment.
It really shows how technology, even stuff designed for everyday consumer tasks, can be rapidly, reappropriated by communities. It lets them bypass traditional channels, create their own defense systems.
It's kind of a game changer for grassroots activism, really.
And it wasn't just digital, right? Traditional activism was also key.
Oh, absolutely. Faith leaders mobilized, hosting prayer vigils, handing out walkie-talkies to track ICE movements.
Walkie-talkies, interesting.
Yeah, old school meets new school tech, I guess. And they were even physically standing as human buffers during protests.
The scale of the unrest was pretty significant, though. Over 575 arrests, reports of injuries.
Sadly, yes. Injuries to 5 horses and 5 LAPD officers were reported. But despite that initial intensity, LA Mayor Karen Bass did eventually lift a curfew. She noted that the acts of vandalism and violence had subsided, and things got very quiet.
Okay, so we have the raids, the community response using tech and traditional methods, and then we hit this major legal and constitutional fight.
This is where it gets really historically significant.
Yeah, our sources detail this truly controversial move. The former president deployed 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines to Los Angeles. And the key thing, without the authorization of California Governor Gavin Newsom.
That's the crux of it. It's reportedly the first time a president has activated a state National Guard without the governor's permission since, what, 1965?
Yeah, 1965. A long time. And the justifications were just worlds apart.
Completely. The former president claimed the situation was caused by gross incompetence of local police, saying they were asking us to come in. He stated the military went in to save a lot of IC officers who were held up and being attacked, stopping tremendous destruction and death.
But Governor Newsom, he pushed back hard, called the deployment illegal and immoral.
He accused the former president of inflaming tensions, breaching state sovereignty, and wasting resources, especially when, as he pointed out, those Guard members needed to be preparing for wildfire season.
It was pretty blunt, saying the U.S. military belongs on the battlefield, not on American streets. So how quickly did this end up in court?
Almost immediately, U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer ruled pretty quickly that the president had exceeded his authority, deploying the Guard illegally.
What was his reasoning?
He explicitly stated the protests fall far short of rebellion. That's the legal threshold often cited, and emphasized that the First Amendment protects the right to protest.
But that wasn't the end of it, I assume.
No, the federal government swiftly appealed. Their argument was pretty bold. Essentially that courts had no role whatsoever in reviewing the president's decision in this kind of situation.
Wow. So that appeal went to the Ninth U.S. District Court of Appeals.
That's right. On June 17th, 2025, a three-judge panel heard the arguments and temporarily paused Judge Breyer's order. So the legal back and forth just continued, really getting to the core of this constitutional question.
Can you break down the specific legal arguments made by each side in that appellate hearing?
Sure. So Brett Shumat, arguing for the federal government, really doubled down on the idea that courts couldn't second-guess the president here. He cited a federal statute saying essentially, the president may call on federal service members and units of the Guard in such numbers that he considers necessary.
He considered it purely an executive decision.
Pretty much. And he also repeatedly used the term mob violence to describe the protests, framing it as a matter of restoring order.
And California's counter-argument?
Samuel Harbert, arguing for California, hit back on several points. First, the lack of consultation. The federal government failed to inform Governor Newsom. Second, they hadn't considered more modest measures.
Less drastic options, basically.
Exactly. And Harbert framed it in much broader constitutional terms. He argued that not upholding Breyer's ruling would defy our constitutional traditions of preserving state sovereignty, allowing judicial review of executive actions, and crucially, safeguarding the right to political protest.
So how did the appellate panel seem to lean? It was a three-judge panel, right?
Yes. Two appointed by the former president, one by President Biden. Reports suggested they seemed likely to keep the former president in control, indicating that presidents probably have wide latitude under that federal law, he cited.
But they didn't fully buy the argument that courts have no say.
Apparently not entirely. They didn't seem to fully embrace the idea that the decision was completely unreviewable by the courts. So it kind of highlights this ongoing, deeply rooted debate about executive power versus judicial oversight, especially when things like national security or public order are invoked.
And just when you think it can't get any more complex, there's this layer involving a tech giant.
Yeah, the Amazon connection, or rather the Jeff Bezos connection, since he owns Amazon, which owns Ring, which makes the Neighbors app.
The very app being used as this grassroots ICE warning system.
Right. And the irony, or maybe paradox, is pretty striking when you look at Bezos's past links to the former president. Sources mention, $1 million donation to the inaugural fund.
Attending the inauguration.
Yeah. Attending the inauguration, yeah. And even those reports, which were controversial, about him potentially meddling with the Washington Post's opinion section to be more Maggie-leaning.
So you've got this incredibly powerful figure, Bezos, who at least appeared to show some allegiance to the former president,
Hmm.
and yet a product from his company becomes this tool used by communities to actively push back against that same president's immigration policies. It's quite a turn of events.
Especially given reports that the former president was apparently furious with Bezos back when Amazon blamed price increases on his tariffs.
Right, right.
So what this ultimately reveals is this kind of profound paradox, doesn't it? A technology designed for consumer convenience, owned by someone with significant political ties, inadvertently becomes a tool for grassroots resistance against the very political forces its owner might have, at times, seemed to support.
It really shows how tangled up corporate interests, political dynamics, and grassroots activism can get in really unforeseen ways. Creates this unique push and pull in the modern information landscape. So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our listener? We've really unpacked a complex situation here in Los Angeles, this dynamic dance between federal power and state sovereignty,
Community-led resistance using these really unexpected tools.
and the very real, often painful human impact of immigration enforcement.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do events like these maybe redefine the lines between federal authority and state sovereignty? And what is this innovative use of everyday tech, like a doorbell app? Tell us about the future.
Yeah, the future of community defense, of activism, especially in this rapidly changing information landscape we're all navigating.
And maybe prompts the question, how might similar grassroots efforts pop up in other contexts you might face down the road? Something to consider.